Welcome. This is the Leadership Confidence Index webinar. I'm Mark Braithwaite. Apologies in advance if I cough. I'm just getting over COVID. I'm going to do my best and have a glass of water, but I have a colleague here who's going to help me out if that gets too difficult. So firstly, I'd like to introduce James Mcquivey. James is a long-standing analyst specializing in identifying, measuring, and making recommendations about the trends that will shape the future. Currently, he's the research director of Forrester's Future of Work team, guiding a team of analysts to not only identify changes in the world of work, but also prepare clients in every industry to approach these changes as opportunities instead of threats. In February 2013, James published his book, Digital Disruption, Unleashing the Next Wave of Innovation. James, please can you say hello?
Thank you, Mark, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. It was a great project to work on with you. I can't wait to talk about it.
Thank you. Very briefly about myself, I'm Mark Braithwaite. I'm the APAC Managing Director of Rodgers Berndsen, and I've been a search professional for more than 25 years now. I published a book called Leadership Disrupted in 2019, which is about disruption caused by the accelerating pace of change. James and I are co-authors of the Leadership Confidence Index that was recently released. So I'm just going to describe a little bit about the format of what we're going to do today, and then we'll get into the paper in depth. So from here, I'm going to summarize the findings, and then James and I will have a fireside chat where we debate and challenge the data, and then later on we'll come to a question and answer session. If you have any questions for James and myself along the way, don't wait for the end. On the right-hand side of your screen, there's a place for you to put your questions in there, and that will come through. And then when we get to the Q&A, I'll have those, and we'll be ready to go. So firstly, just to summarize, we created our first Leadership Confidence Index in 2020. The data was gathered in late 2019, and it was really quite interesting in that there was significantly negative feedback that came through this survey about leadership at the time. And what was interesting was this was before COVID, so the data was collected and collated in December of 2019, and the paper came out in March 2020. Now, it was called an index, but of course it's hard to have an index when you haven't got anything to index against. It was the first one, but that was the starting point, and the second paper brings forward some really interesting findings. But the headline comparison between the two was that leadership confidence, or our confidence in leaders in late 2019 showed that only 24% of organizations were confident in their leadership. And this is a stark comparison to now, where we're looking at 42% confidence. Now, this is very positive news. And if you're like me and you're looking at the news every day, there just seems to be a barrage of new disruptors coming towards us, and none of them seem to be positive. But the fact that our leaders are considered to be doing better today than they were two years ago is good news. I suppose what's more interesting is why that is. So we're going to dive into that shortly. There were four key themes came from the survey. The first one is that leaders are doing better than they were 2 years ago. The second one is that technology is now considered an enabler as opposed to a disruptor. The third point is that the ESG agenda and linked activities in most organizations have accelerated. Now, we'll go into that in greater depth. And then finally, there was a very strong belief that there's more disruption to come. Surprise, surprise. James and I have been talking about disruption for many years. That's been our key theme for our speaking. But the last 2 years has been obviously a massive step up in that, as you will all have felt. James, I just want to ask you can you briefly explain how we got the data, and just talk about the sample size and the kind of people we surveyed to get this data?
Absolutely. So first of all, we were very excited to be able to join Odgers-Berndtson in this second wave of the Leadership Confidence Index. Now, of course, that means we need to preserve as much of the original method as possible, even while we add to it, so that we can pursue other things that have changed since then, obviously the pandemic. So what we did was we used a method where we identified lists of thousands of board member level, C-level, and their direct report individuals around the globe. We really wanted this to be globally representative to capture the variations across the planet. We fielded the survey from November into December of last year, so at the end of 2021. So almost exactly 2 years after the first one. The first wave of the index was fielded. We contacted these individuals by email. We invited them to share their opinions with us. We were able to collect 1,100, so 1,100 responses from really quite around the globe. Most of the responses fell into the larger companies where the lists of executives are larger. So across EMEA, North America, and into Asia as well. But we also got individual responses from dozens of countries. So we're very happy about that. The 1,100 responses, then we were able to go and analyze and compare to how the differences manifested from the survey 2 years ago, so that we make sure we're collecting from the same kinds of people in the same way, using the same method. And I'll say throughout the conversation today, when we talk about a confidence level, we're going to be talking about someone saying either 8, 9, or 10 on a 1 to 10 scale. We consider that high. So when we get to these comparisons, like 24% 2 years ago to 42% confidence, that's 42% people saying 8, 9, or 10 on a 1 to 10 scale. That's a lot. This is one of the reasons we need to get together and talk about this, Mark. So thank you.
Yeah. Can I just sort of challenge you on this data a little bit, though, James? Is this CEOs telling us how good they are, or how they rate themselves, or is it more objective than that?
So it's a very important question. Important enough that we design into the survey opportunities to check for those kinds of things, give people the opportunity to evaluate themselves as well as their peers. And really the bulk of what we're going to share is their evaluations of their peers, the other executives, including themselves at their organizations. And because this is confidential, we're able to see that they feel quite comfortable replying with frankness about the state of the executives in their organization. And they'll tell us very frankly negative things about the state of executives in their organization. I would imagine if we only asked them to tell us about themselves as individuals, the numbers all would have gone up dramatically. That's just a normal thing about psychology and executive psychology specifically. But we asked them to tell us about their peers. And at this moment, they are really dependent on those peers in order for the entire organization to move forward. And so their frank assessment is coming through in the data.
Yeah, I suppose for me, I thought about this a lot in terms of when we were writing the paper. So why is this important? Why is it important that executives are confident in each other? Well, actually, we don't run companies by committee, where every employee gets a vote on everything, but every employee does get a vote on whether they're engaged in the organization and whether they stay with an organization. And that's absolutely critical for the success of running a company. So let's have a closer look then, James, at these 4 themes. And that first one is that leaders are performing better than they were 2 years ago. So I'll just restate the number there. We've gone from a 24% confidence in the leadership to 42%. Now that's a big change, and it's interesting that it's happened during COVID, and I suppose we need to understand why. Does the data, James, give us any more insight into this?
It really does. So let's pull up that first slide and we'll look at it together. Now, I'm not intending for everyone to stare deeply into the screen on this first slide. Nicholas, if you can bring it up. But let me just paint a picture of what you're looking at here. So we ask people to assess personality characteristics as well as skills and specific capabilities So we're measuring about 30 different things here. And I'm just sharing with you the skills battery that we gave people. And the skills are soft skills as well as more concrete skills. And we're essentially asking people to evaluate the senior executives in their organization for each of these skills. And you can see there is a wide distribution. So at the highest level, things like motivation and resilience, these came out very high. Nearly 2/3 of people scored 8, 9, or 10. So that high level that I mentioned before for things like that. And these are as much personality characteristics, and they correlate with some of the personality characteristics that we measured separately. But you can also see that the confidence in their skills goes way down as you get to things like data analysis or digital acumen. And this is very telling. If you think about what an executive needed to be able to do 20 years ago, it really, the things at the top, motivation, resilience, stakeholder management, that was enough. You didn't even need to be as adaptable back then as a senior executive, because your job was to keep a steady course forward amid change. But if you look down this whole list, it gets more and more concrete, and the skills, people's estimation of their peers' skills in the executive suite goes down. And I think this is, to me, what we're looking at here is people saw over the last 2 years in their executives this incredible resilience, adaptability, stakeholder management. These are all necessary to get where we got. But now when we ask them for some details, they realize, well, there's some things, emotional intelligence, operational transformation skills, that they don't quite have. And I think while we're here saying this positive message, the confidence in leaders went up over that 2-year period of challenge, we're also suggesting there are some obvious places where that confidence hasn't reached yet, and some skills and areas that I think leaders need to pay attention to, because that number, that 42 number that we're talking about, could go down if we don't start to address some of these areas, especially given how necessary they are today compared to even 2 years ago and certainly 10 years ago.
Yeah, I suppose what's interesting is we see this massive jump from 24% to 42 and go, wow, that's fantastic. But it's still only 42%. You know, it's not even half of organizations have real confidence in their leaders. I suppose what's been fascinating to me in looking at this, and James and I, when we first looked at the data that came out, it jumped out of the page that leaders are doing better. And why is it during a time of crisis that they'd be doing better, when you'd think that leaders who aren't that great, they're managing things okay, but when things get tough, they would do worse. And we talked about it from a perspective of a captain of a ship sailing across a very calm ocean, and the crew are looking at the captain saying, well, what are they doing? You know, they're sitting there having a cup of tea and we're doing all the work. But then when they hit a big storm, that's when the captain shows what they've really got. And we think that's really helped executives bond and do better. So COVID has been a catalyst for that. But hopefully we can keep that going. James, if I can just sort of bring you to the second theme, which really is a core area for you, and that's attitude towards technology's changed. Now, my book in 2019 around disruption, there was a big factor around the accelerating pace of change and how there was resistance to technology. Technology would enable companies to increase productivity and improve their lot in life and their competitive standing, but it was always difficult to implement that, and the speed of change of technology was seen as a disruptor. And what we've seen through this survey, and Leadership Confidence Index 1 supported the work from the book, but what we've seen through this survey is that technology is now firmly seen as an enabler rather than a disruptor. Can you comment on that and what the data's telling, and explain what the data's telling us, James?
This is one of the reasons we were so eager to participate in this second wave of the index, because technology is an area that Forrester focuses on, and our understanding of the role of technology has always been seeing an organization try to see technology as this separate thing that sometimes, as you say, you resist because it can be painful, it's difficult. You hope that Maybe your competitors will stumble their way through the technology and make all the mistakes first, and you'll be a fast follower, which is a very common strategy. But what we have seen in the pandemic is you had companies that wanted to be fast followers or maybe even second slow followers suddenly had to increase their technology. They had to increase their automation in particular. Automation planning went up during the pandemic, even at a time when people were trying to be fiscally conservative in their spending planning. We saw obviously all of the systems that need to enable both the remote workforce that became common in many professions and in many industries, and then obviously managing the security risks that come with all those people being remote. Suddenly, the executives who used to look at technology as that thing that maybe the CIO or CTO used to do and everyone else was related to and tangentially, now they have to be materially involved in the technology because marketing, operations, they're all going to be dependent on that technology to a degree that they didn't have to be before. Even if marketing technology was taking off in the way we interacted with customers because customers were so savvy, we didn't necessarily need to be sophisticated in the technology we deployed inside of the organization. That's gone now. Everyone knows we have to have the best technology inside the organization, reaching out to our customers and incorporating that entire experience. So it is interesting. I still mentally think of technology as a disruptive force, but it really is not. It's now like electricity. You can't operate a business without it. And so the good news is executives are now starting to realize this, and they're just starting to plan it in to their thinking.
I think, if I can just challenge you on that a little bit, I think executives have always known that technology is an important part of their organization. But I think what the data, and I look into the data, and we don't need to put a slide up about this. Everyone can download the paper and see there's lots on it. There's the survey shows us that the people surveyed see their leadership team engage with technology at a greater level and have more confidence that they're understanding it well. But when I look at it, it's still not quite there. What do you think of that, James?
Yeah, you're right. That's actually interesting. There used to be an old joke that we made about, executives never thought they needed to have a mobile strategy until they got their first iPhone. And then they realized, oh, I need to do this. So it is seeing the executives using the technology, having confidence in the technology. It does make a difference in the organization, trusting that, we're going to make intelligent technology decisions. That's one of the things we measure. We have a whole tool that we use called the Robotics Quotient. It sounds more science fiction than it really is. It's just a way of measuring the confidence that workers have in their leaders' decisions around automation, robotics, and other futuristic technologies. And that tells us a lot. When an employee can say, I trust that my leaders understand this technology and will make good decisions about it, their nervousness about their work process, their career path just goes way, way down. So that might actually be one of the best things that's come out of the pandemic, is that executives who perhaps, as you say, always knew the technology was important, but now they're demonstrating that it is personally part of how they do their jobs, and they recognize that could inspire this confidence.
Yeah. I suppose what you're saying is it's not acceptable to just delegate that to somebody else. It is part of everybody's job. I just want to move on to the next theme, the third of the four, and that is the diversity and sustainability, or in fact the whole ESG agenda is now absolutely center stage. Now, this is something that obviously everybody's been talking about as in every business for quite some time, but there's always been a gap between the rhetoric and the action, as we know. What I think is particularly interesting is that the workforce, having worked at home for a couple of years, the values have changed. There's plenty of work being done on this, and the place and stated purpose of an organization, how that fits into society, is becoming more and more important to employees, and they will either join an organization or possibly even leave an organization if they don't believe the values are aligned. And going back to when I started my career, certainly that wasn't something we were thinking about. We were just desperate to get a job, but very, very different world today. Now, the data tells us that this has moved forward. But James, I think you've been a little cynical about how far it's moved. Do you want to comment on that?
I think cynical, that's a fair word to use. Here's the thing. When we measured both on sustainability and diversity and inclusion, we were very pleased to see that everyone admits, first of all, that it's important at a very high level. And so the data were very high on both of those things. And when we asked for details that included, setting priorities, communicating this to employees, also very, very high. Where it would get smaller and smaller is when we would ask, what specific steps are you taking in this direction? And I think this goes back to my earlier point about the opportunity that we have to use this higher level of confidence. There is an opportunity as well to deliver on some of these things that the executives and the employees think are important about diversity and about sustainability. But if we're not seeing the actions, if the actions don't rise to the same level that we're saying the aspirations are. So let me give you an example of this just from the data. And as you say, people can download this and look at it themselves in more detail. But when we ask people about setting leadership diversity targets, that was our lowest performer on the list of how effective is your organization improving its inclusion and diversity. We saw a lot of better performing indicators, but when you get down to things like setting leadership diversity targets, it falls to about a fourth of people have high confidence that their executive has done that effectively. Now, is that the right thing to do? Is that the one thing to measure people on? I don't know. All I know is that the pattern in the data for both sustainability and diversity was we all agree it's important. We're communicating how important it is to our organization, but it starts to go lower and lower as we ask, well, what specific things are you measuring? Are you integrating specific practices into your culture? And the numbers go down. And that's understandable. You have to start with the will before you can get to the way. But now the way needs to deliver, I think, or the employees might wonder if this is really happening.
Yeah. I think we're sort of seeing an evolution of this in a lot of organizations where it's that they've been waking up to the need and then making a statement as to where they need to get to, but putting in the practical steps and actually achieving something is taking some time. But I'm going to put you on the spot, and you can take the fifth on this if you like. But do you think that it's companies that are driving change in themselves from an ESG perspective, or are they reacting to their broader stakeholder community, clients, employees, etc.? What do you think?
Well, we definitely see both. So we separately from this project, we're constantly conducting employee level surveys. So we're asking some of these same questions at the employee level. Do they have confidence in the leadership and so on? And actually, surprise, their confidence in leaders is as high or higher than the leaders' confidence in themselves. So that's also an interesting statistic. But when we think about that confidence that the employees have and what is contributing to it, it's when they see that the company is making good on some of these promises about what diversity and sustainability are supposed to mean for the organization. So, I guess it's not a bad thing if a company is listening to their employees and as a stakeholder and saying, we really need to take this seriously, both to preserve our employee engagement, but also because maybe our employees are leading us in a positive direction and we need to be open to that. So it's not awful that sometimes it takes someone prodding you with a stick, even if it's your employees prodding you with that stick. I think the one place where it gets the least productive is if the stick that's prodding you is coming from completely outside of the organization and you're worried that you don't look good in the public's eye. And so you start saying things and maybe doing things that are reactive without synchronizing with the preferences and hopes of your employee base. Because then you increase the cynicism if you're doing things that seem only purely reactive, at least in my opinion. And so, yes, it's great if you're internally motivated to do this. It's great if you are externally, meaning as an executive, external, meaning your employees are leading you in this direction. I think the one riskiest spot is when you're doing this mostly or purely because you're worried about what it looks like from a public relations perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm just picking up on one of the things you said where executives were at times more critical of their own performance on this than their employees, and that could mean two things. One, it's the good part is constructive paranoia, which always produces results, and the negative possibility is that they've given out a whole lot of rhetoric about it, and they know they're not going to meet up with that, and eventually get caught out. But we could probably talk about that one all day. But let's move on to the fourth and final theme here, which is that there's definitely more disruption to come. And you and I have been talking about disruption for a long time. I think everybody here today will agree this has been the most disruptive couple of years that we've had certainly in my career. And none of us were planning for a pandemic. And if you look at what's happening today, on every front, some things caused by the pandemic, some things caused by other factors, we're in for a disruptive time for as long as we can see. James, you've got some data on what the survey respondents saw as the disruptors that they expected to be dealing with. This may have changed because this is now 6 months old and the world's changed again since. But can we have a quick look at that?
Sure. Well, first of all, this slide is the one that shows us what people think about the rate of disruption, either increasing or decreasing. And again, not expecting you to try to get in there and read all these numbers, but actually just keep it up on the screen for a minute here. Just to understand that the disruption that Mark is talking about, those two outer white bars are people who think disruption is going to increase either somewhat or significantly. And then the middle bar, as we get to the darker bands, it's going to stay the same. Now, think about that. Stay the same means it's still higher than it was in 2019. There are a few people who thought it was going to decrease, and I think that's important for us to think through because maybe there has been a hope through parts of the pandemic that we would want to see that life would come back to normal and disruption would, get normal again. And maybe some people still think that. I don't think that's true. We've unleashed a lot of change, and we will see the most effective leaders will take advantage of that opportunity to change. Now, specifically to technology, and let's go back to the other slide, specifically to technology, the kinds of things that people are looking at that are going to be priorities for the organization for the next 12 months is long. And again, you can get all of this data in the full report. If you download it, take a look at it. But what we're seeing is that across the board, people are going to solve the disruption problem with technology. And what you're looking at on the right-hand side is a priority survey that Forrester conducted separately, and we included this data in this report because it's so telling. It helps us see that basically everything is a priority. When we ask people, are you going to focus on security and privacy? Yes. Are you going to increase business adaptivity with technology? Yes. Are you going to improve IT capabilities to focus on employee experience? Yes. Yes, 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 all the way down. So there's almost no variation there, but that's the point. Everyone knows how dependent they are on the technology to solve the disruption challenges that they're going to have because they see that disruption is not going to get less. It will most likely get more. At least that's the consensus opinion of the 1,100 executives that we focused on. And it's not just deal with and survive the disruption that's yet to come with technology. It is use this technology to thrive and gain an advantage, which I think we're going to see. I say I think to be humble. I know we're going to see this because we're already in constant dialogue with executives who have seized these opportunities. I mentioned automation before as a big area, but simply using technology to measure things in the workplace that we haven't measured before and then improve them. That's an overwhelming initiative on the part of many organizations. Now that more things are being done with technology, it gives more data for you to use, which you can misuse, but you could also use to identify ways that your organization can improve how it interacts with employees, how it interacts with customers, and how it interacts with partners. We're going to see a lot of opportunity come out of all of this, and the technology is the enabler to resolve the disruption that's yet to come.
Yeah. I suppose, from the disruption is coming at us from many, many angles. As I said, nobody planned for the pandemic, and it was very difficult to deal with. But I'd like to put it to you that executives are fitter today in dealing with change. They've become more resilient and they're ready to deal with change in a faster way. Excuse me. And I also think employees have become more accepting of that change as well. So, just bringing that back to the leadership component, hopefully leaders can maintain this. So, so thank you, James, for the detail on all of those. I'd just like to sort of summarize here now, and so there was sort of four key themes here, and some leaders have been struggling. So if we're saying 42% of companies are confident, obviously some leaders are struggling and others have actually been thriving in this environment. James, you and I were speaking earlier, and you mentioned that some other work you've been doing through your organization, data's come back to you as your people have seen this paper that supports this. Could you just make a brief comment on that?
Well, let's just be upfront. When you see such a big change over 2 years in one survey, you want to inspect it carefully to make sure that it wasn't caused by some other factor or something in the method, etc. But all across our surveys, which we do with consumers, which we do with employees at every level in human, so HR departments, all of these things, confidence in leadership went up during the pandemic. And so it's very consonant with what we've seen here. And I think it provides for us an opportunity to realize, as you say with your analogy of the ship in the storm, the ship has proven seaworthy. The all hands on deck have been performing well. There's your employee base. And the captain has been performing well as well. So there is a tremendous opportunity that is visible to everyone. It's not just executives who see this. And I think that's the point for us to realize. And it's an opportunity that if we don't seize, we will regret and perhaps we'll fall backward. And that's the risk that we want to prepare people to avoid.
Thank you. Could we bring up the summary slide, please? So just to summarize, there were 4 key points. Leaders are doing better. Attitude to technology has changed for the positive. The ESG agenda is moving forward at a faster pace. I'm sure we'd like it faster, but the progress is progress. And just about everybody concurs that we're not at the end of a disruptive period. We're going to see significantly more disruption. Leadership is hard, and there are new challenges we face every day. But with the full support of all internal stakeholders, from the board through to the employees at even the lowest level, a business works better. It is more engaged. A leader isn't fighting to get things done. They're leading and just getting things done. And we all know this. And for those who are doing better than they were 2 years ago, I'm really hopeful that what we've presented today, and if you read the papers a lot more detail, you may be able to link what you've been doing to create a formula of what you need to keep doing and what you can possibly ignore. And for those who are struggling, and maybe I think, as James said, leaders rate themselves higher than their team do, so there might be a worth asking people within the organisation. Hopefully, this can provide some kind of pointers and perhaps even the start for a roadmap to what is important to getting all that engagement from all of the stakeholders. So if you don't have the report and you would like to download that, there's a resources tab on the right hand side of your screen. You can download a PDF from there. It's also available on the Odgers Berndtson website. So now I'm going to open up to questions. I've got a screen at the side here that's sending me questions. Just bear with me. Okay, so the first question that's come through is for James. James, do you have any comment on the next generation of leaders? Are they more tech savvy?
That's such an interesting, it's a tempting question. because I could say I have a technology bias. I could say, yes, absolutely. Everyone has to be really tech sophisticated. There was a movement some years ago that everyone needs to learn a little bit of coding just so that you understand technology. I think there's a temporary phase through which all leaders need to increase their general sophistication with technology. They need to be aware of some of the challenges that technology poses. I think all of that's very, very positive. We have seen, for example, that more and more CIOs or CTOs are reporting directly to the CEO, which historically it's often been a role that reported to the CFO. And you can think about your organization and where your patterns fit in there. But if it were me, if I were the CEO, I would have the technology leadership report to me, so that I can understand their issues a little bit more and not just be expecting them to reduce cost of deploying technology, which has historically been why it's been under the CFO. So yes, I think more and more the executives for this period need to become acquainted with technology. But if you fast forward 8 years, 10 years, the leadership sitting in those seats or inheriting those seats as they become vacant, I think will be more intuitively in tune with technology, to a degree where they won't think of themselves as technology specialists. It will just have been something that they grew up with in the work world. They will never remember a time when they weren't using email and mobile as part of work. They'll have more empathy for the workforce using those technologies, and they'll be more bothered than perhaps they are today when something doesn't work very well to log into this internal system or that internal system. Executives in the past didn't even think about the employee experience of those technologies. They just wanted to know, does it work? And is it cheap enough that we can keep paying for this year after year after year? So yeah, a period in which increased savvy, deliberate increased savvy, let me put it that way, will be important. And then phasing into a period where it won't need to be deliberate, it will just be assumed.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question was for myself. Does this all mean that some leaders will become obsolete? Yeah, that's a really interesting question to ask a headhunter. I believe that there's always an evolution. If you look at the way leaders operated 20 years ago and the way they operate today, there's been a change. If you took that experienced leader from in their 50s from 20 years ago and put them into a role currently, they may fail. And there's an evolution of how leaders, the principles of leadership stay the same, but how people think about the world and their employees is constantly evolving. So I think what's really interesting here is we're seeing an accelerated pace of change in organizations, and this will mean that those who can't change will become obsolete faster. And that will come through boards saying our CEO or our CFO needs to be changed, and we do this all the time. There's often a reason for it, that they're not the right person to take. They were the right person to get the organization to where it is, but not the right person to take it into the future. What I am seeing though is that that's happening at a faster pace. And I'm just going to continue because the next question sort of continues from this, and that is, will we see a changing way of measuring executive performance and therefore more executive turnover because some executives don't make the grade? Exactly the same thing. I mean, there's been psychometric tools to assess the performance of leaders. I mean, obviously there's the objective performance of an organization from a financial perspective, but how leaders are seen, how effective they are as a leader. There are psychometric tools that have been around for a long time that can do that, but a lot of organizations haven't been using them, and there's also a significant evolution and investment into improving those tools, and we're seeing a larger uptake of that, so that there are more useful measures of how effective leaders are in the eyes of all of their stakeholders. So I can see that will become a more serious. There'll be decisions made in a more serious way because of those tools.
Mark, can I add a question? Can I add a note on that one?
Please.
Because one of the questions we often get as more organizations are learning how to have an employee experience orientation, to have an employee experience program, which is actually not the majority of companies today. They're starting to learn how to listen to employees. What are the surveys we need to be taking? How often? How do we act on those surveys? It's a really positive change. Well, one of the questions that's come to us is, should executive metrics incorporate some aspect of employee satisfaction, employee engagement? It's a really, we don't have a specific answer to that question. The answer will be particular to every organization, their culture, their approach. But I think it's a bold suggestion that this metrics question you were talking about, how do we measure effectiveness of leaders? If we are incorporating, performance in the marketplace, we're starting now to see more people incorporate things like customer experience where that's appropriate. Incorporating employee experience could be very, very satisfying to do. I think the risk, though, would be it can't just be a popularity contest. It can't just be, oh, our executives are really interesting and charismatic. No, it needs to be specific to what are the things that your employee experience that make you successful as an employee, and are the leaders driving those things or not? Now, that would, I think, avoid some of the problems of, oh, we have a really handsome or attractive leader who speaks very well, which may not have anything to do with how effective they are, and get us focused on, are you enabling employees to be powerful contributors to the mission of the organization? And if people say yes to that, keep that executive around.
Yeah. Well, actually, I want to jump into the next question, because this one is actually asked of me, but I'm actually going to pitch it to you anyway, James. And that is, all of this data points to significant change. Which members of the C-suite will play the most pivotal roles in the future? Now, I know that we as part of the survey, we haven't put a slide up about that, but there was quite a lot of data on that. And can you refer to that without the slide?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'll pull that up right now. It's an astute question, because there has been so much evolution in who does what in the organization. I mean, just the very definition of what a CIO was, and I keep saying CIO or CTO. Not everyone listening may be aware of the difference between those two things. But even a CMO 20 years ago was a branding and marketing expert. Now they have to be digital marketing experts. Usually they own customer experience. It's very different. So what you do inside each title changes, but obviously sometimes you need a completely new title. So not surprising that 85% of people, I just pulled up the results here. And again, all of this is available in the full report. So please download and look for things that you wondered about that we don't comment on. 85% of people think the chief executive officer or its equivalent is the most important role. And that makes complete sense. Surprising to me is that 53%, so the second most ranked executive here, is the chief human resources officer or the equivalent. That really surprised me, because typically people think of the CHRO or the CPO, the chief people officer, as this support function. It's not a strategic disruption management function at all. And the fact that our respondents recognize that it is very interesting to me. However, there is a shortage of chief human resource officers who have these strategic skills. Most of them are very good at compliance. They're very good at keeping the company out of legal trouble, very good at minimizing the expense of the people in the organization, as opposed to flipping it around and realizing that they're one of the most important assets in the organization is the people and their thoughts and their engagement and so on. So I'm impressed that our respondents saw that. But from there, it goes to the obvious: chief operating officer, chief financial officer. And then we start to get into all these different things down the line. So there are chief innovation officers, 20%, chief sustainability officer, 11%. So I guess it's less important to say how many people thought that role would matter, these particular roles would matter, and more important to say that people are sort of looking around. They're not just saying, here's the 5 C-level people that are going to run everything. They're looking around and saying, are we going to need these other roles? Are we going to need these other functions in order to move forward? And I think it's healthy that we're having that conversation, even though I don't know that we have the answer just yet.
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting, the way you've articulated about the chief HR officer, and that's from our perspective as a headhunting firm, we probably see it in a different way to the way Forrester sees it, or we're exposed to it in a different way, I should say, because those predominantly are our clients. And that change has been an evolution that's been happening in my mind, for probably at least 5 years now. Not in every organization, but a lot of organizations CEOs woke up to the fact a few years ago that that their key resource in their organization is their talent, and that's what that job as CHRO is about, making sure that they get it right. But as you say, chief HR officers who are up to the task of operating at that most senior level are absolute gold, which actually leads us directly into the next question. And somebody's asked, is recruitment harder or easier now? Well, I'm delighted to say it's harder, because otherwise we as an executive search firm would be out of business. And I've always said that organizations who come to a search firm looking for talent aren't looking for the bottom 95%. They're looking for the top 5%, and that's why they want to engage in the kind of process that we run. And what's that top 5% is always 5%, and and I would argue now that with what we're seeing with this disruption, that's even getting squeezed. So it is. We all know that hiring is actually harder now. There's just been a massive shortage globally of people at every level. I still can't quite understand why that is, but that actually is the case. And I don't think it's going to get easier. I think organisations are going to need better. They're just going to continually have to increase the capability of their executive team, and people can either learn and step up and deal with the change, or they can't. On the same note, though, we are seeing a return to real investment in employees that seemed to go away for quite a number of years. I mean, a lot of companies have talked about it, but if you think back 20 years ago, large organizations like IBM would have a massive graduate intake. And if you look at a lot of the senior executives today, those are people who've worked their way through the organization. They had a career path, a career plan. They were invested in all the way. And then that stopped, that went away to a large degree, and organizations cut back and would rather bring skills in from outside. And we're definitely seeing a return of that, of investment in bringing people through the organization. I'll just need to look at my screen and see the next question. So there's a question here about did we analyze whether there are any demographic or group differences in responses, that is between different sectors, industries, seniority, or geographies? James, I'm going to have to ask you to respond to that one.
Sure. So because we got 1,100 people, we're very excited about that. It does mean that when we start to break it down into specific industries or specific regions or countries, it's then hard to compare subsets or different behaviors across those and do so reliably. So all we were doing in our analysis, because we did that analysis, we didn't include it in the final report, because all we were doing was making sure that we didn't have strange samples in specific regions or in specific industries that answered in ways that were outliers when compared with other data that we have for those same samples in those countries. So the good news is there weren't any deviations that made us nervous and have to throw out sample. But it does mean that we're not in a position to be able to say, this country versus this country, or this industry versus this industry, other than to say that nothing was surprising or out of step with other data that we've collected on those industries or those countries before, if that helps.
James, you're very popular, so there's another question for you here. Do you think the leadership confidence has increased due to the way leaders have managed the pandemic for employees and their families' well-being, since they were personally involved in crisis management? The employees emotionally feel closer to the leader, which could have skewed the survey.
You're right on something there, whoever is asking that question. So we conducted surveys every 3 months throughout the pandemic of employees, so not executives. And we asked them specifically what aspects of how their leadership was handling the pandemic that resonated with them. Number one was, if you keep me safe, you keep me and my family safe, overall confidence is going to be very, very high. We thought there'd be specific policy preferences among employees, and while there were none that really that really rose to the top. Like, I want my company to say this is our policy or that is our policy about when to vaccinate or how and so on. Those varied all over the place and all over the countries in which we were serving. But the overall message was, my leadership cares about my well-being and my family's well-being. And just like you say, the emotional cascade that leads to, of they care about me, they want me to be well, and then I can now transfer that to, and they want me to succeed in my role, which, by the way, has always been a high predictor of engagement at work, is seeing that executives want you to be successful as an individual. So, but during a pandemic, you have to be safe first, then you can be successful. In companies or executives that demonstrated that, won the complete prize in terms of the overall confidence boost that they received from their employees if they demonstrated. So good. Whoever noticed the emotional part of that latent in there, you got it. You understand this.
Yeah. It was a question from India. I mean, just picking up, if I can add to that. This person said, could this have skewed the results? It's likely to have changed the results, but skewed it, I don't think so. I think leaders either showed their real empathy and their authenticity and the engagement with their employees during difficult times, or they didn't. And if you think about a larger organization where employees probably couldn't get to, maybe get a one-on-one with the CEO once a year, I think CEOs were at home for quite a long time and having to engage much closer with employees one-on-one, get to know them in a different way, or really lose that engagement. And I think the pandemic forced the exposing of that authenticity of CEOs, and that's what we've seen in the survey. And I think that has significantly affected the results.
It's interesting. I wouldn't have thought to say, is that therefore a biasing characteristic to me? Is that therefore the solution to future leaders? And it is. You need to invoke an emotional response in your employees. Now, you need to do it authentically, like Mark, you were just saying, and you need to then follow it up with actual behaviors that demonstrate the authenticity of that emotional connection that you're forging. But I think that's not a bias. That's the solution.
Okay. I can't bring up any more questions because we have to sort of go into the end point of closing this down. So if you have any further questions and you would like James or I to answer them, you're welcome to email directly to us, and we'll do that, or do that through your contact within Odgers Berndtson. This webinar has been recorded. We will be doing this again in 2 weeks for a different time zone. So after that, then this recording will be released, and you'll be able to get a copy of that through your Odgers Berndtson contact. Also, after this webinar, you'll be automatically directed to a really short feedback survey about the experience. James has done this a lot. This is my first webinar, so I won't be offended if you think it was terrible, but please let us know, and that'll help us make sure that we're doing the right thing, and we get the right time for these things that we're doing in the future. Firstly, I just want to thank James. I've really appreciated your time and your input, and partnering with you on this and writing something together has been a real thrill. So thank you very, very much. I mean, the expertise that's gone into this has been greatly appreciated and respected. And also just thanks to all of the marketing team in Odgers Berndtson for helping put this together. So, and then most important, thank you for everybody coming on and listening and taking part in this webinar. Much appreciated, and bye for now.